In the heart of the Mediterranean lie Sardinia and Corsica, two islands with a rich history symbolized by their striking Moorish flags. The Sardinian flag, known as the Four Moors, originates from the Aragonese conquest. It represents victory over the Moors. Corsica's flag features a symbol of defeat, the headband moved above the eyes to signify freedom, reflecting Corsica's fight. The Moor's head symbolizes the medieval conflicts between Europeans and Moorish forces, embodying the victory over the Moors after 700 years of Moorish rulership.
Journey into the captivating influence of the Moors in Europe. From the 8th to the 15th century, the Moors left an indelible mark on the cultural, scientific, and architectural landscape of the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. The Moors, predominantly Muslim, brought a rich tapestry of knowledge, art, and innovation to Europe. Cordoba, under Moorish rule, became a beacon of learning, boasting libraries, universities, and architectural wonders. The Alhambra in Granada and the Great Mosque of Cordoba showcase the exquisite blend of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish influences, reflecting the multicultural harmony cultivated during this period. Moors' contributions spanned science, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy, laying the foundation for the Renaissance and shaping the cultural mosaic of Europe.
Statues of Moors and African people all over Europe to this day that you can see, but you got to go to museums to see them. They're very quiet about it. Saint Calogero was another patron saint of Italy. He was a black man, and there's black statues of this man all over Italy, and there's paintings of Saint Calogero all over Italy and Sicily. They worship this man in Sicily. They still have statues of many Moors up in Europe today. They have a statue of Saint Benedict that was made in the 1700s. There's another bust carving of Saint Gregory that's in a museum in Germany. So there's statues of Moors and African people all over Europe to this day that you can see, but you got to go to museums to see them. They're very quiet about it. You have to go over there. And also you have to learn about these things in different languages, because they keep that history hidden because they'll put it in another language.
People of mixed African and European ancestry in the Spanish colonies. Queen Charlotte was descended from Margarita de Castro y Souza, a black branch of the Portuguese royal family. Queen Charlotte, 1744 to 1818, wife of the English King George III, 1738 to 1820, was directly descended from Margarita de Castro y Souza, a black branch of the Portuguese royal house. This is King Charles Stuart II, the Black Boy King of England, 1630. 1685, the word Stuart comes from the Old Nordish root Svart, which means black. Black Boy was in fact a pet name given to the heir to the throne by his mother Henrietta Maria, French by birth but with some Spanish blood in her veins. When Charles was born, he is said to have had a swarthy complexion, and his mother used to refer to him as my beautiful black boy. History confirms that the Moors ruled in Europe, primarily Spain.
Europeans would imitate the Moors, and they had set a party forth, was known as the Wigmore Party. This is where Europeans would wear the curly wig.
This is actually the Royal African Company. Some people call it the Guinea Company. And this is what there's a book on heraldry. Royal African Company. And can you see it says, supporters, 2 African blacks. Can we see that? And then underneath we've got a certain motto in Latin. Alright, I have no idea what any of that stuff. So 1100 AD was quite an interesting place. The western part of the Roman Empire was in decline, and because the Roman Empire was the civilizing force in Western Europe entered the Dark Age. Things were going very badly indeed. And no doubt you've been taught about the Dark Ages, but let's be clear, the Dark Ages is one place in the world. Anyone know where? Europe. It doesn't mean the rest of the world was in a dark age. Does that make sense? And consequently, the appropriateness of the term needs to be discussed. Now, what exactly was going on? According to a European professor, his name is Robert Briffaut, we read, from the 5th to the 10th century, Europe lay sunk in a night of barbarism, more awful and horrible than that of the primitive savage, for it's the decomposing body of what had been a great civilization. Cities had practically disappeared. They were pulled down and used as quarries to build towers in which a bishop or a baron established himself, who could afford some protection. In Nîmes, for example, the remains of the population dwelt in huts built among the ruins of the amphitheatre. Other towns were completely abandoned. Famines and plagues were chronic. There were 10 devastating famines and 13 plagues in the course of the 10th century alone. Cases of cannibalism were not uncommon. There were manhunts, not with a view to plunder, but for food. Are we understanding this? All right, now when I read that, the obvious question is, for real? So what do all the European scholars say? Joseph McCabe wrote a book called The New Science and the Story of Evolution, where he says, none of our modern sophistry redeems the squalor of Europe from the 5th to the 11th century. By the year 1000, Europe condition which, if we were not Europeans, we should frankly call barbarism. Yet at that time, the Arabs had a splendid civilization in Spain, Sicily, Egypt and Persia, and linked it on to those of India and China. Now you'll notice that Joseph McCabe has called what happened in Spain Arab. Interesting. In other words, couldn't bring himself to go as far as he needed to go, but it's cool. All right, what about the civilization of the Moors? There's a Muslim chronicler, and we read, Córdoba is the bride of Andalusia. To her belong all the beauty and all the ornaments that delight the eye or dazzle the sight. Her long line of sultans form her crown of glory. Her necklace is strung from the pearls. Her poets have gathered from the ocean language. Her dress is of the banners of learning, well knit together by her men of science, and the masters of every art and industry are the hem of her garments. You've never heard a city described like that. And you can read about this in the story of the Moors in Spain. A golden city by at least the year 950 AD. It had raised streets drained by sewers. It had raised pavements, it had street lamps, and it had a population of 1 million people. There were at least 200,000 properties and 60,000 mansions and palaces for the elite. The grander homes were 2 stories. They had latrines, running water, and the fine gardens surrounded the large building. There were 900 public baths and many private baths, 800 public schools and many colleges. Education was offered to girls as well as boys. This is in an Islamic situation. We understanding this? The El Zahra Palace, almost a city by itself, had 15,000 doors of brass and iron. By the way, I did actually visit that site. It is off the charts. If you get the opportunity, visit Spain, check out the Medina El Zahra Palace. There were 4,000 markets where you could buy Chinese tea, Indian spices, Russian furs, African ebony and ivory, and locally made goods. I know people are thinking, Robin, you're exaggerating. We ready for this? All right, the building is called the Great Mosque of Córdoba. The Spanish today call it La Mezquita. And if you then look up at one part of the ceiling, that's what's there. Not exactly jungle cemetery, is it? Who are the Moors and what terms were used to describe the Muslims in Spain? I'm going to briefly talk about the conquest of Granada. I'm going to talk about the Umayyad dynasty, the Almohad dynasty, the Almohad dynasty, and the Kingdom of Granada. So these are the themes that I want to get with in today's session, time permitting. All right, let's go. The people in North Africa is a complicated story. And it's complicated because North Africa is made up of multiple populations. Now, the very first people there were Africans. And they were descended from the people who created the Saharan rock paintings. And their descendants in North Africa are still there. They're called the Haratin Berbers and the Chauchen Berbers. Then you had a second group of people joining the populations in North Africa, Europeans. There was a European invasion of Egypt, and this invasion was during the time of Ramses III. And these invaders were called the Sea Peoples, coming in from the sea. And they had a big impact. And their descendants are in North Africa today. Then there was the Roman occupation of North Africa in the 2nd century BC. And the Romans ruled North Africa right up until the Arab period. And there was also the Vandal invasion. The Vandals are Germanic speakers. Does that make sense? And that's a very, very important part of history. Scholars don't want to talk about it too much. But it's a very important part of history, trust me on that one. If I've got some time, I might get into it a little bit later on in the presentation. Then, of course, there was the Arab conquest of North Africa. The reason why so many North Africans are called Arabs is because they're not indigenous to Africa. They come in from Arabia, they conquered their way. Does that make sense? And they conquered in the 7th century AD, and right now, 2022, they're still there, and they are the dominant population. Then you have Europeans, another group of Europeans entering North Africa as slaves. And these people entering North Africa as slaves came from the Slavic states. Slavic states, Eastern Europe. Does that make sense? One of the reasons why Eastern Europeans are to this very day called Slavs, and one of the reasons why Western Europeans have beef with Eastern Europeans. And as you know, that's what Brexit was all about. Joining the population in North Africa, Africans, who were captured as slaves and brought there after the 16th century. Does that make sense? Now, the point is, do not confuse Group 1 with the original Moors. The oldest art in North Africa are the Saharan rock paintings. And the Saharan rock paintings, we feeling that image? And if you can Google them, think of all Africans. And the descendants of that are the Haratin Berbers and the Chauchen Berbers. And that's what a typical Haratin looks like, right? But we mentioned the Sea Peoples, the Vandals, the Romans, and their descendants, and intermarriage took place between them and the original Moors. Does that make sense? So you now have Moors that look like this. Are we understanding that? Now, this woman is a part of Moorish history too. Does that make sense? So what usually happens is black scholars say, well, the term Moor means black, so it's black history. No, she's in it as well. Does that make sense? Yeah? All right. So what are the terms that appear in the literature? You've got the term Moor, which is the European term meaning dark or black. That's the term Europeans use to describe the black people in Spanish history. Then you've got the term Berber, and that's the term that Arab scholars use. It's a linguistic term, people speaking Berber. The origins of Berber, by the way, is in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa. You can link ancient Egyptian, you can link Berber, you can link Cushitic, which is Somali, you can link Hausa or Chadic. They all go back to one parent, which is in the Horn of Africa. That automatically tells you that the very first Berber speakers were sub-Saharan Africans. Then you've got the term Arab. Now, a lot of scholars are happier using that because it's better than saying African. Do you see why people are happier saying that? Now, in truth, the term Arab can, with justification, be used because the official language used during the Moorish period was indeed Arabic. Right? Then you've got the term Saracen. Right, you old heads here, who remembers the TV series Gladiators? Right, did you notice that all the black gladiators had race-specific names? There was Shadow. Everyone's forgotten this, right? All right, for you young heads here, this is what Britain was like back in the day. So you got the gig, you became Shadow, you became Rhino, you became Nightshade. And of course, Saracen means is desert dweller. It's coming from the word Sahara. The problem with the term desert dweller is it doesn't tell us is this the African desert or the Arab desert. Which one? Does that make sense? All right, now the Arabian invasion of North Africa was of great consequence. The Arabs conquered their way across between 639 and 708 AD. Many Africans fled south from North Africa to lands south of the Sahara to avoid being enslaved. This is why in Africa today, non-blacks live north of the Sahara and blacks live south of the Sahara. Do we get this? And if you visit any one of the North African countries, the further south you go, the blacker everybody gets, right? Now, those that remained converted to Islam. The Arabs occupied Egypt in 639 AD. They occupied Tripoli, which is Libya, 643 AD, and southwest Morocco by 681 AD. I'm using terms like Morocco because you know where it is on the map. These countries didn't exist under those names at that time. In 698, they appointed Musa ibn Nusair governor of North Africa. However, Musa wanted to take control of Spain, but feared that an invasion at this time would exhaust his armies. So he had to think of what am I going to do next? Musa ibn Nuzair is a Yemeni, so he's from the Arabian Peninsula. But the Yemenis, do any of them look like any of you? Yes. Yes. So that's another story. All right, so what was going on in Spain? Well, in Spain, the Visigoths, the Germans, had been in control for the previous 200 years. And they are the ancestors of modern Spanish identity. Does that make sense? So if you're Spanish, your ancestors are the Goths. Does that make sense? And it's during this same time period, these German speakers basically conquer the Roman Empire. They also conquer their way into Britain, and they become the English. Do you get that? So what does that mean? It means before 500 AD, no, 400 and something AD, there weren't any English people living in England. Do you know where they were living? Germany. Yeah? All right. Now, the Goths seized Spain from the rule of the ailing Roman Empire that was collapsing during this period. So what did Musa do next? He sent a reconnaissance mission of 500 African converts to Islam into Spain, led by an African called Tarif. Using 4 ships supplied by Musa, they landed in Spain and they plundered a port. And they gave the port a new name, Tarifa. What about that? Named after Tarif, right? And what happened is the Moors imposed a special tax at that port, and that's the origin of the word tariff. Right? Did we know this? Aren't you glad you're here? All right, so sent a second and more formidable African army into Spain, led by Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq ibn Ziyad was an African, and he led an expeditionary force of 6,700 African soldiers, 300 Arab translators and propagandists, and they occupied a portion of Spain, and then they renamed that part that they occupied the Rock of Tariq, Jebel Tariq, Gibraltar. We understanding this? African. Yeah? Okay, now European writer from the time period, there's a European monk, and this is what he said happened. The reins of their horses were as fire, their faces black as pitch. Their eyes shone like burning candles. Their horses were swift as leopards, and the riders fiercer than a wolf in a sheepfold at night. The noble Goths were broken in an hour, quicker than tongue can tell. O lockless Spain. Now, you see that there's a description of the Moors that you don't often see. The Islamic rule in Spain were unstable. There were 19 governors over Cordova between 716 and 747. When you have a large number of rulers in a short period of time, that's political instability. Okay? Now, what does the term Moor mean? It was a geographical term of Phoenician origin, and it originally meant Western. The Phoenicians applied the term to the people of Northwest Africa. Another theory claims that the word Moor is derived from a Kushite capital city called Meroe. Now, the Greeks and Romans adopted the term Moorim, but also described these same Northwest Africans as Nigri, black, and Adusti, scorched. The Latin word Moorus became a synonym with another Latin word, Niger, which means black. In other European languages, the association of the term Moor with Negroes continued well into the Renaissance period, as you know, because Shakespeare did that, right? Now, example, did you know that there was a Catholic saint called Saint Benedict the Moor? And then we read on the Catholic website, Benedict the Moor was born a slave near Messina, Italy. We read on. Then at the very end it says, the surname, the Moor, is a misnomer. So why is it a misnomer? Originating from the Italian il Moro, meaning the black. Now, if il Moro in Italian means the black, what does el Moro in Spanish mean? In it. Do the technical. However, Spanish students of mine, I used to be a school teacher, they insisted that the term morena does not mean black, it means brown. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to investigate. Now, there are also Wikipedia pages that claim that the term Moor is not an ethnic term, it's a religious term meaning Muslim. Does that? There are modern scholars that will concede that the term Moor does indeed mean black, but according to them,
The word Moor means black in every single language except Spanish. Does that make sense? And in Spanish, it doesn't mean black. What does it mean? All right, so there's a passage in the Bible, Song of Songs, and some of you know this. I am black but comely, O you daughters of Jerusalem. Does that make sense? We got that? So what I did was I pulled up a Spanish Bible to find out how was that translated. And guess what word they use for black? Morena, which we've been led to believe means brown. All right, hold that thought. So you know what I did? There's something called, you've got these various texts. We've got third paragraph, RSV, very dark. Can you see that's the same word that was translated as morena? We read on. JB, AV, ASV, more correctly, black. All right, let's carry on. This particular form is used only 6 times in the Old Testament. In this context, the word is hyperbolic. Sometimes makes one swarthy, but not black. Although the simile, that's Psalm chapter 5, verse 11, indicates that the meaning of the word is shiny black. What's really interesting about this is Samuel Pepys had something to say. Samuel Pepys, 23rd of May 1663. This is his diaries. And so we parted. Only there was walking in the gallery some of the Barbary company. And there we saw a draft of the arms of the company which the king is of, and so is called the Royal Company, which is in a field argent, an elephant proper with a canton on which England and France is quartered, supported by 2 Moors. The crest and anchor winked, I think it is, and the motto too tedious. And can you see that's that same Latin thing that I couldn't read earlier? So can you see that at the time, people said these were Moors, and then later on, it was now pretended that it was 2 African blacks. Now, if you can confuse the 2, it means that Moors can be confused for African blacks. Islamic culture of Spain was largely a Negro achievement. For this reason, the culture is known as the Moors in Spain, a reference to the black colour of the conquering group, whether from Africa, who were the majority, or whether they were southern Arabs or Yemenis, who were the minority. All right, now during the pinnacle of intellectual culture in 950, some of the Moorish achievements then. The silk industry, agriculture where they were growing rice, sugarcane, dates, ginger, cotton, lemons and strawberries, mining, where they were mining gold, silver, tin and lead. There was a maritime industry. There were factories turning out sword blades, turning out shields, turning out brass and iron implements, and the sciences such as the number system we have today, the compass, the teaching of geography from a globe. By the way, the compass, that wasn't an African invention, somebody else did that, but bringing it into Spain was the Moors. Teaching of geography from a globe, yes. There is a famous Moorish geography text by a scholar called El-Idrisi, and he says the world is as round as a sphere, and the waters are adherent on it by a process of natural equilibrium, which means gravity, and it is divided into 360 degrees. This is in a Moorish geography book, 1153. Are we feeling this? Yeah, that book, by the way, the other name for it is Kitab Ujar, the Book of Roger. Moreover, the materia medica that Europe had right up until the 1900s was the same one that the Moors introduced. How we know this? H.G. Wells drops that information. Right, now impacting Europe. By 950 AD, centers of learning were just beginning in Christian Europe. Located at Barcelona, Toulouse, Marseille, Lyon, Segovia, etc., they existed to translate texts from Arabic to Latin. Berbers of North and West Africa. In the year 1048, Yahya ibn Ibrahim, ruler of the Berbers of the desert, made a pilgrimage to Mecca. He returned to North Africa with a religious teacher from Mecca called Ibn Yazid, and Yazid attempted to teach Islam among the desert Berbers. He failed and was chased away. So everyone then ended up fleeing to Takra on the Senegal River. So we're now in Senegal. There they established a monastery and lived as recluses, and then people joined this movement from Senegal, and they became known as El Morabitum, or in English, Morabites. Another word is the French one, Marabout. Does that make sense? These are all West African now. And the word that you see in the literature is El Moravids. Now in Tekra, the movement grew. Tekrarians wanted their independence from ancient Ghana and saw the new movement as a force that could win that independence. So in 1062, the El Moravids, the same group from the desert and now people from Senegal, they established Marrakesh, which is the African capital of their empire. So Marrakesh in Morocco used to be a black city. 1076 they conquered ancient Ghana and held it for some years. Tekra became independent of Ghanaian imperial rule. By the time we get to 1082, there were hundreds of Moors and Arabs streaming into Africa, fleeing the campaigns of the Christians because the Moorish rule, the Arab rule in Spain had become unstable and the Europeans were kicking off, so people fled to Africa. They visited Yusuf, leader of the Berbers, and they begged him to get an army together to help, to assist the Muslims against the Christian onslaught that was taking place in Spain. Yusuf raised an army said to have included every ethnic group in the Western Desert and sent them across the sea to Spain, where the African army beat the Christians at Zalacat 1086. That is Yusuf ibn Tashfin. We feeling that? Now, just to put it in perspective, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, can you see Mansa Musa's on the same map? Who's darker? Right, so can you see the Moor is darker than the Negro? Are you feeling this? Now, isn't that powerful evidence? So, anyone wants to run up their mouth, show them this. Alright, so did they build anything in Africa? In Marrakesh, that's one of the monuments there. So if you go in that monument and you look up, that's what's there. Now, as ruler of Spain, Yusuf's forces seized Seville, dethroned its Islamic rulers. He accused them of being sunk in pleasure and sloth. And the result was the Almoravid Empire had a court in Africa centered in Marrakesh and a court in Spain centered in Seville. And according to Lady Lugard, this established once more a supreme sultan upon the throne of Andalusia. The dynasty which he founded must be regarded as an African conquest and an African dynasty. That's coming from Lady Lugard, the same woman that names Nigeria. Same woman. All right, now the Almoravid Empire was very extensive. Under their sway were the lands of Senegal, Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, and Spain, with 13 kings acknowledging the overlordship of Yusuf. So can we see a map? We feeling that? A little bit big, isn't it? So what did they achieve? The Almoravids are probably the people responsible for spreading golden coinage into Europe. From the 12th century, the Christian Spaniards minted golden coinage to imitate the Almoravid coins. In 13th century mints in Florence, Genoa, Marseille, and Venice turned out golden coins in imitation of those of the Christian Spaniards. And in 14th century Europe, Northern Europe, we start to see golden coins. And when golden coins were made in Britain, what name were they given? Guineas. And according to El Idrisi, I mentioned him a minute ago, El Idrisi, gold was minted at some place in the extreme west of Africa in the 12th century, put into circulation. That might be where the Almoravid coins came from. Right? Okay, now, the Almoravids tried something in Spain. We're not quite sure what the something was, but they got their butts whooped. And the result then was the Kingdom of Aragon issued a crest that shows that the Christian cross has beaten the 4 Moorish princes. Does that make sense? Alright, now can you see how the Moors are depicted? No ambiguity there, right? And then, when the Habsburg dynasty came along, they took the same crest and turned it into one of their coins. And can you see that not only have you got the crowns, can you see the hair? Are we feeling that? And you know what places like Corsica, Sardinia, those kind of places, you want to look at their flags. Yeah? We are on their flags. Alright, now, that was the Almoravids. The next dynasty, the Almohades, and they began as a religious movement among the Masmuda Berbers of Morocco. And according to the documents from the time, the Masmuda Berbers were described as blacks by Abu Shama in his Kitab al-Rabdatayan. Blacks, Sudan. Does that make sense? So in 1106, Ibn Tumar completed his religious education and preached against the Almoravid establishment, who he accused of being lax and luxurious. So Ibn Tumar himself was declared to be the Mahdi, which is the Messiah. What happened next? Well, Abdul Mumin, another Masmuda Berber, took control of the movement. He was a brilliant organizer who unified the various Berber groups into a cohesive force. And there was therefore a power struggle between the Almoravid establishment and the newly rising Almohades. And the newcomers triumphed in 1147. They seized Marrakesh and executed the last Almoravid monarch. The documents say he was deprived of his head. And in 1150, they became masters of Spain. Thus, for a second time, says Lady Lugard, a purely African dynasty reigned upon the most civilized throne of Europe. This is why you got to quote this stuff. Let's take a look inside. Is that not exquisite? We feeling that? Alright, now the city of Seville in Spain became the African capital in Spain. It was a fine city of famous gardens, squares and a suspension bridge. It had good streets lined with magnificent buildings and spacious. If you get the opportunity to take a look, take a look. And of course the Heralde of Seville. Now that is, that building now is a cathedral, but you can infer what it would have been before it was a cathedral. It was the mosque. Yeah? That were established in certain parts of Europe, that were translating texts from Arabic to Latin. By now, those places had borne fruit, and by the 12th and 13th centuries, we get the rise of the major European universities. Bologna in Italy, 1158. Montpellier, France, 1180. Oxford, England, 1200. Toulouse, France, 1223. Rome, Italy, 1245. Cambridge, England, 1257. Are we feeling this? And this is the beginnings of what's going to become known as the European Renaissance. Now, there was much disunity among the Almohades, and therefore, I don't want to get into that. No, let me get into it. Have we got time? There's a document, Abu Ghaffar refusing the post of Secretary of Granada, and he refused the post because he had to work along the Sultan's son. And he wrote, the dark-skinned Berber seemed to him far below his own intellectual standards. Now, just marinate on that. This is now the fourth dynasty. And according to Professor Lane Poole, the Kingdom of Granada was the last bulwark of the Moors in Spain. It was not much that was now left to them. Between 1238 and 1260, Fernando III of Castile and Jaime I of Aragon conquered Valencia, Córdoba, Seville and Murcia. And the rule of the Moors was now restricted to the present province of Granada. Within this limit, however, their kingdom was destined to endure for another 2 centuries and a half. Though hemmed in on all sides, the Moors were well served by soldiers. The people of the conquered cities, the most valiant warriors of the vanquished Muslim states, came to place their swords at the disposal of the one remaining Mohammedan king. 50,000 Moors are recorded to have fled to his protection from Valencia, and 300,000 from Seville, Xeres and Cadiz. Nevertheless, Granada was forced to become tributary to the Castilian crown. The founder of the dynasty of the Beni Nazir, i.e. the Nazrids, an Arab called Ibn al-Ahmar, the red man because of his fair skin and hair, was a vigorous sovereign. So this now is not an African dynasty. This is now an Arab dynasty. Does that make sense? But it seems that Africans stepped very, very correctly. Here's how. Because it seems that they worked out better marrying off to this woman and keep that going. So by the time we get to the end of this dynasty, they're black. So yeah, they stepped very correctly here. Al-Ahmar, we read, he paid homage and tribute to Fernando and his son Alfonso the Learned, not however without more than one. Right now, what's there? We feeling this? By the way, if you ever go to the site of Alhambra, and in 1417, however, Muslim leadership in Granada became more and more unstable. There were short-lived reigns, factional fighting, and rulers getting their backing from the Christians. After 1469, the kingdoms of the Christians, Aragon and Castile, had become united by the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. From 1484, they campaigned against the Moors and gradually closed in and then blockaded the city. So we get the conquest of Granada, 2nd of January 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella entered Granada as its masters. They exiled Abu Abdallah. Abu Abdallah is his proper name, but in European accounts he's called Boabdil. Abu Abdallah, Boabdil, same person. So they exiled Abu Abdallah, where his descendants learned to beg for their daily bread. 4 years later, King Manuel of Portugal ordered the expulsions of the Africans. Those expulsions continued up to the time of King Philip III, who completed the policy in 1609. Some returned to North and West Africa, but others fled elsewhere in Europe. Where in Europe did some of them go? England. You follow me? John Blank, all that stuff. Yeah, they end up here, some of them. It is stated, writes Professor Lane Poole, that no less than 3 million of Moors were banished between the fall of Granada and the first decade of the 17th century. They were cleaned out. All right, now the question is one of them is supposed to be Isabella, one of them is supposed to be Boabdil, Abu Abdallah, and one of them is Boabdil's mother. Now the mother is veiled, does that make sense? But you can see her hands. All right, check this out, York.
The only remnants of Islamic Al-Andalus in this procession are these giant puppets of Granada's last Muslim rulers, Boabdil and his queen. But of the Jews, nothing remains. And those who converted even lost their identities. They were given Christian names. But to the church, they would always be infidels at heart.
Did you like the betrayal of Abu Abdallah and his mother? Are we feeling that? And notice it wasn't me that did that. I ain't got nothing. They didn't ask me, trust me. That's how this. All right, European scholars are saying 17th century, that's the period where scholars were developing theories of white racial superiority. Does that make sense? And there was something that was around called the Negro question. And the great philosopher, John Stuart Mill, addressed the Negro question by saying two things. What about ancient Egypt? And the next one was, what do you think he said next? What about Spain? And at the time, no one could answer. Because, this book had come out, what were people going to say now? What about Spain?
Educated them and educated their children, taught them how to read and write, how to sail and navigate the rough waters, how to cultivate, irrigate, grow crops and vegetables, civilized and paved streets. This beautiful city of Rwanda that has stood even 500 years after we left. As far as we are concerned, you are our genetic grandchildren. We are not really interested in a competition with you. No great-grandfather can compete with a grandchild.